12月10日，国外大主播西给发布了一个28分钟的德鲁伊试玩视频。从视频中我们可以看到，德鲁伊速度快，技能伤害高，范围还贼大，变身切换丝滑，这下子真的德鲁伊王朝了。这样的德鲁伊又谁能拒绝呢？国外圣诞长假即将到来，看来 GGG 是给出了满满的诚意，然后再美美的休假去了。大家可以打开 AI 翻译，慢慢品尝。
G'day folks, Ziggity here with a hands-on preview for the Druid. We'll take a look at the shape-shifting forms, Druid spells, and how the new class plays overall in the early campaign. I got a chance to record this when I went to the studio to host the Q&A, thanks to Grinding Gear Games for covering my flights to do so. Keep in mind that as this was recorded more than a week from launch, it's non-final and stuff can, and already has, changed from what you'll see here. The new Druid archetype is flavoured by the combination of elemental and nature magic combined with shapeshifting into various beast forms. It does the rare and challenging action RPG task of giving us the potential to play a hybrid of spells and attacks. The human form is where your spellcasting happens, and your beast forms are where your melee happens.
强大的德鲁伊再配合一个好的加速器，可以让我们在新赛季如虎添翼。阿里巴巴大厂旗下 Biu Biu 加速器，12月4日到13日10天无门槛免费加速，高峰期也不限速，免费结束后还可以输入口令流放的骆驼，再领3天会员。领过口令码的兄弟在搜索栏输入流放的骆驼，进入骆驼的专属活动页面，可以保底再领3天会员，最高可以领终身会员，永久免费加速。Biu Biu 加速器的引擎再次升级，深度结合阿里千问 AI 大模型，专为流放2搭建智能高速专线，延迟直降 90%， 下载安装速度提升10倍以上。内置功能中过滤、查价、汉化、翻译等一应俱全，兄弟们不妨下载 Biu Biu 免费试试。流放2新赛季开荒快人一步，跟我一起选阿里大厂 Biu Biu 加速器。
Not natural this. Air's gone sour.
When you start on the beach, this is brought home when you immediately find a staff with Lightning Bolt to begin spellcasting. However, that is quickly followed by looting the new melee weapon type, a Talisman. Talismans function just like any other melee weapon in terms of where your damage comes from. They scale just like a mace would, for example, with increased physical damage and attack speed. But unique to Talismans, they give you the ability to select a shapeshift form using this UI element. Werewolf and bear form is what you have initially, with Wyvern unlocking a little bit later on. This choice doesn't lock you into a form, but rather it just grants you the basic attack of the chosen form. Whenever you use one of these talisman attacks or any other shapeshift ability, you'll automatically shapeshift into that form. The basic abilities of each form are fairly straightforward, with the potential for a little bit more complexity as you go and unlock other pieces that they can combo with. The Bear's Maul grants rage on hit, while the Werewolf's form, for example, creates exploding chunks of ice on attacking frozen enemies. So they're designed to support or reward the other shapeshift skills that you unlock later on.
Feels familiar somehow.
Each of the 3 forms also comes with passive effects and mechanics. The version I played was likely non-final in this regard, but for example, Bear had defensive boosts and generated endurance charges when rage was consumed, while the Werewolf gets a sizable out-of-combat movement speed buff, which you can see in its movement as it drops to all 4s. You quickly also get your first actual gem on the beach here, Volcano.
By primal will.
This is a spell that causes an explosion and spits fire projectiles for a long duration. There's a running theme with a lot of the Druid spells that they provide some sort of ongoing benefit and that they often synergize with things that you can do while shapeshifted. This is all to support that idea of hybrid spells and melee shapeshifting, because after all, if it was something a little bit more limited, like a fireball for example, then you have to make a clear decision between whether you use a fireball or one of the shapeshifted attacks. In this case, you can place spells, they'll continue to do stuff while you're shapeshifted. Perfect. More on Volcano later. For now though, we can fight the Miller with Volcanoes and follow up with lightning strikes from the staff if we choose, or with our chosen shapeshift forms melee, which is obviously what I go for.
Still breathing? That's a start. Sleep now, whatever's left of ye.
The first uncut gem expands your options with the Entangle spell, Lunar Assault for Wolf, and Furious Slam for Bear. I'll test all of them as we go, don't worry, but I decided to kick off with focusing on the Bear's Slam combination first. The Bear's basic attack Maul generates rage on hit, and Furious Slam spends rage to empower itself with a more powerful explosion that leaves behind jagged ground. The fact that you're spending rage also means that this constantly maintains endurance charges due to the Bear's passive bonus. Rage has been simplified across the game, with rage spenders now more consistently costing 10 rage, and a new visual effect shows in your character to indicate that you have at least 10 rage, making you glow, even in shapeshifted forms too. So this means that whenever you're glowing, you know that you can use a rage spender. I find the Devourer first up, so we get the first test of our metal a little bit early.
Aye, this reeks of the Devourer's lair.
And here we get to see a bit of the potential power of the Bear Styles combos.
You'll not harm another soul.
So volcanoes spit fire globs at an even pace, but slamming them causes an extra set of projectiles to fire. So placing volcanoes on bosses and bear slamming them while generating and spending rage is a simple and chunky feeling combo, and it makes pretty short work of the Devourer here.
You've gorged on the good folk of Clairville long enough.
With the first support gem, I grabbed Fist of War to empower the Furious Slam, which plays very smoothly. It's a perfect pairing with this, as you naturally tend to space out the slams anyway as you move around or as you generate rage with Maul. So the double empowered slams that you get from Rage and Fist of War are also very satisfying, so pretty happy with that as a first support gem choice for this playstyle. There was some other interesting options there though, such as Overabundance and Burgeon for Volcano. So Overabundance lets you have a max of 2 volcanoes out instead of 1 at the cost of 50% less duration, which I think is a pretty good idea in many cases. Brings them down to something like 4 seconds maybe, but I think that's a very good trade-off because you can slam multiple of them down really fast, get a lot more burst on bosses, and have your slams triggering 2 volcanoes at once. So I run into my first of the League's Val encounters around here. These are just simple sacrifice platforms, basically kill monster in circle. Thankfully, they aren't even too strict about you needing to be in the circle. You just kill monster from the circle. So this video is primarily about the Druid. I'm not really going to be focusing too much on the League mechanic here, but I will touch on my very limited experience with it. The basic premise is kill monsters from 6 circles, and then you go raid a ruined temple for loot and a bunch of crafting options to improve your gear as you level. It's fairly unobtrusive as you play through, and then you get the chance to spend a little bit more time in the actual temple to do some gear crafting that felt pretty powerful. For now though, I get a chance to pick up the Wolf skill, Lunar Assault, and the plant spell Entangle, so I'll test those out in the near future. Entangle first, it places a fissure that grabs nearby enemies to deal rapid small hits of physical spell damage while slowing the entangled foes. Skills like this are always really good for utility, like Oil Grenade for example. Slowing enemies is really effective on crossbow. I anticipate Entangle might feel similar here as a utility spell. And similar to Volcano, it's got that duration lasting benefit design, so it kind of means that regardless of your actual leveling setup, your build, you can throw in some entangles for some extra damage and slowing. I'm immediately pretty impressed with the feeling of bear form for blasting bosses here. Double empowered Volcano slams is very rewarding. And the hybrid gameplay option on Druid means that if you need to kind of back off for a little while, you're taking a bit too much damage, your flusts are getting run down, you can give yourself some distance and throw down some volcanoes, entangles, and later on other spells while you're recovering. I'll take the opportunity before we test some wolf form here to comment on the overall feeling of shapeshifting, and it is, thankfully, seamless. GGG have done a really good job here of leveraging the weapon swap system, especially after they kind of changed it to not have delays and things like that. And they've done it in a way that requires zero thought on the player's behalf, which I think is really important. We've dumped a bunch of new players on the Druid here, and then you had to like teach them a bunch of complicated weapon swap mechanics and set up for the UI. It would be a real problem, but you don't actually have to think about it or do anything initially to use it in its simple form. So spells just naturally swap you to human form and your staff or wand so that you can use them, right? Because they don't necessarily work otherwise, and the shapeshift abilities need the talisman, so they automatically swap to that and thus swap you into your form. There's no real delays here, and it just feels smooth and seamless, even swapping between multiple forms. And the gameplay feels pretty fast too, because that was the thing from the preview that people were concerned about. Especially in Wolf form, it feels very fast. The initial reveal, it did a good thing of like focusing on clear, low damage, low movement examples of mechanics so that you could understand what was going on, but it didn't actually show what it kind of felt or looked like to play the druid, and it made it look honestly a bit slow and clunky.
So much blood spilled here, the earth still bleeds.
The biggest thing that I noticed playing it though, that almost right away in Act 1, it was much faster and smoother than I would have thought from the footage, and that's because you're actually using things like dodge roll and sprint to reposition between attacks. And you obviously have a lot more damage than what they use in those previews. And now onto the Red Veil Zone, I decided to test the early game werewolf style a bit more. Lunar Assault is a large slash melee skill that has a very high freeze rate and cold conversion. And that can be paired with the Ice Bite support to give you a big bonus cold damage buff that's up pretty much all the time with this skill, as it freezes so easily on regular mobs and even fairly easily on most bosses. As a quick aside, I can confirm that you can be knocked down while sprinting in animal form, and I can confirm that it's just as hilarious as it normally is. Though this only happened like 2 or 3 times in the entirety of my playtime. I'm not sure if I'm just getting better at using it, or if the shapeshift forms are naturally more resistant to heavy stuns maybe. Either way, it only happened a few times. Anyway, the werewolf doesn't have any immediate synergy with the volcano stuff, but there's no reason to not just use them anyway. Like, you slap them down and then go into melee and tear them apart and you're getting the bonus damage, right? And it's all scaling kind of just as well as each other at this point in the game. The early combination for Wolf is using the Shred attack on enemies frozen by Lunar Assault. Shred's that basic attack for the werewolf. It's a rapid combination strike with the final hit in 5, I believe, hitting twice. Each hit from Shred on a frozen target chips off a chunk of ice, which then explodes after a decently long delay. The typical approach for rares and bosses is to use Lunar Assault a couple times to freeze them, followed by 1 to 2 full combinations of Shred, with the icicles exploding for some pretty wild burst damage at times, especially on any sort of larger bosses. The icicles do fly backwards behind the target, but on bosses, most of them tend to hit, especially those bigger ones. There's a lot more you can do with the icicles later on, and more combo pieces for the wolf form. It's only just this kind of basic bit here, but it feels fast and satisfying, and that freeze potency is very high right off the bat. So it's a pretty good early game for the werewolf, I felt. Honestly, for the first half of Act 1, I would say both Werewolf and Bear felt like very valid approaches with support from the spells. I don't know that I would go pure spells unless you maybe worked in something from one of the other elemental trees as well. There's no reason you can't mix and match those if you're using a staff anyway. Volcano and Entangle are like fairly good on their own, but you want something else on top of that as like a burst skill. Obviously you can use the basic staff skills, those are okay, but you could use a third gem maybe to pick up a spell from the elemental tree to round it out with a bit more immediate damage if you're going for more of a pure spellcaster, for example. Since those pure druid skills are pitched at being kind of like ongoing effects that keep going as you're doing something else, so you want something else to do. So after Red Veil, the next tier of gems gives access to Shockwave Totem, Rolling Magma for the Wyvern form, it's actually a Wyvern skill, and Pounce for Wolf, and Wing Blast for Wyvern as well. So Wyvern gets 2 here because it's kind of first introduced at this point. You also like unlock the ability to swap to it on your talisman at this point, even if you've got the original talisman, I believe. I suspect maybe it's based on character level, that would make sense. So this expands your build options in quite a few ways, about 4 different directions right away. There's a lot of lines of play on the druid here, even right at the early game. So you can totem with bear form for jagged ground eruptions, for example. Rolling Magma plus Volcano as a combo there for fire-focused Wyvern. The magmas trigger the volcanoes. You can incorporate Pounce into wolf form, which gives a bunch of benefits. And you can also grab Wing Blast for like a lightning-focused melee Wyvern with its default attack. Since at this point I was really enjoying the wolf form, I grabbed Pounce, and this is possibly the best all-rounded skill in the entire druid category. It's a skill of all time, I'll tell ya. Big fan. It's a great movement skill that leaps gaps and obstacles, which is enough to use it just by itself, but it also slams and hits a large area of effect, which can be boosted with Fist of War. It marks a target on hit, and it automatically marks the highest rarity target, so it just works. You can link your own mark later on, or you can just use the built-in Predator's mark, which is honestly quite good on this skill. It gives the target increased damage taken. Great. It's based on the number of enemies of your enemy that it has nearby, if that makes sense. So, okay, yeah. if you and your minions are standing next to it, it takes more damage. And it also summons a wolf companion each time you trigger the mark on kill. There's other ways to trigger it later on. So it provides its own minions to trigger Predator's Mark's effect anyway. So this skill does everything. Crazy. Obviously it's a must-have in wolf form, but I used it in every single build I tested on Druid. I think if you're using a talisman in your build, you're probably going to want to use this skill. A leap initiator, mark on hit is really good for any melee playstyle, and it's good to just have unless you have like another movement skill that you really want to use instead. I can see using it. It's important here, I think, that I drive home just how you aren't locked to a form as well. Like, you may know that, but it's easy to just not really think about it. Your talisman choice is only the selection for which basic attack you have. It doesn't lock you into a form. You don't choose a form like most games like this. It's only important what you choose on your talisman if you actually plan to do some sort of combo with it, and I don't think every build will necessarily use the basic attack. Some of them will because they have some pretty powerful combo effects. But for example, the bear forms one just generated rage, and there's other ways to do that. Rage support gem on another skill, for example, so I can absolutely see not using the bear's basic attack for too long. And you'd only use the werewolf one if you were planning on doing some sort of like icicle based build, right? So you're absolutely free to leap in as a wolf and then proceed to bear slam everything, for example. And it took me a while to really fully take that in and incorporate that into my gameplay. I still catch myself thinking of each shapeshift form as this like own separate thing, even though I know it's not. But try and like remind yourself to take Druid a bit more holistically, right? It's if there's like a skill or passive bonus from one of the forms that you want to enable some combo or synergy with your build, then use it. Nothing stops you, right? The devs have given some guided and more obviously spelled out combos within each particular like shapeshift form or archetype. Like for example, Bear's Maul generating rage and then Slam consuming it, right? Like these are pre-packaged items that we're given as obvious starting points, but there's plenty of room for cross synergies between forms and potentially even other weapon types too. Like I don't see why you couldn't like generate rage on a bear and then consume it in wyvern form for the big flame breath or something. Or even alternate between bear slams and human form mace slams. I'm sure there's a build there. So wolf form, which already felt really good with its high movement speed and attack speed, definitely got faster and more furious with pounce. Overall, this playstyle is a fairly straightforward melee attacker with some room for some pretty good skill expression, I think, in how well you position and freeze and then swap to shred enemies so that you kind of choose which direction the icicles fly off. I think if you are pretty good at it, you can perform, you know, get a little bit of extra juice out of it. But if you just want a lunar assault, freeze everything and just kill them with that, like a freeze cleave build, then you absolutely can, I think. It's not as high single target right away as the full bear form combo, unless you get like really nice shotgunning off the icicles on a large boss, for example. But freeze locks down many bosses, and I felt like I was just dismantling any bigger targets, you know. It's like by the time they go to do their first real attack, you freeze them and then they're nearly dead. So a lot of the fights were just kind of over before they began. I did dip my toes into the wyvern form next to mess around with some of their skills a bit off and on. I played with rolling magma and volcano as a kind of ranged wyvern. Magma orb bouncers also trigger volcano's projectile pulse. So it's pretty difficult, I think, to position and take full advantage of, especially if like the enemies are running at you, for example. Something like Entangle can slow enemies down to help with that, so you can throw down some Entangles and Volcanoes and then shoot out some Magma Orbs to do some of that. But it's definitely a more difficult playstyle than what the other ones that I've covered so far offer you at this stage in the early game. This was a bit of a running theme for me with Wyvern in my play session. It's a more complicated form with some very powerful, specific elements, but less straightforward lines of play and synergies overall. It's also the one that's probably seeing the most changes from what I played to when it launches. I already know some changes that I'll mention as we go. I will come back to Wyvern a bit more later, because I had my first little temple foray after my 6th Val sacrifice here.
This place has gone to ruin. Power blankets this altar.
So the League is introduced to you with a just very simple initial design. You place some basic rooms. It almost doesn't matter where you put these first ones. Later on, where you place them upgrades, but it highlights and makes it super easy to no-brain it if you want. And then you just run that small temple to clear the rooms you placed, leaving whenever you want. You don't have like a specific objective here. You can clear the rooms and you'll get like I believe a portal to send you out of there once you're done with all of the rooms. But basically you're just going in there for the actual specific rewards of each room. And that is like a bunch of chests and weapon racks and things that drop gear, or a bunch of crafting benches that do things like improve quality, add sockets, let you Alk, reroll a magic item, which is really good while leveling. Regal, a magic item. Exalt, a magic rare item, and so on. So just doing like 1 or 2 of these quick little temple forays each act will give you a pretty decent chunk of gear improvement. I think I did 1 per act. You get a really good amount of items to craft too, but I recommend hanging on to any like specific bases you want to upgrade as you go into one of these. So for example, your next weapon base that you need to craft, you know, you don't have to use crafting currency, you can just go into the temple and make it. Or maybe you like need movement speed boots, so keep a nice pair of boots in your inventory to potentially craft movement speed on. That's how I ended up getting some of my movement speed boots. I've never had so much like socketed and quality gear while leveling in Path of Exile 2 as I have with this temple.
I need more time for that.
So after my quick 5-minute temple gearing session, I quickly returned to the cemetery to absolutely embarrass Draven in wolf form. And then I do much the same on Lachlan too, which is often a decent difficulty spike for a lot of builds.
Hunting grounds. Best be careful shape-shifting, lest I take an arrow to the arse.
The other set of Wyvern starter abilities is Melee with Wing Blast and Wyvern's default attack Rend. So Wing Blast is a bit like Spear's disengage skill. It's a backwards leap that can get you out of harm's way and do some other utility things. But in this case, it also is a large AoE that stuns primed for stun enemies and triggers an extra explosion for some nice kind of like AoE clear on those stunned enemies. It also generates charges on stunning enemies, power charges, with a surpassing chance, it's called. You can scale it past 100% for more charges, potentially, for example. That's how that works. And one change that GGG has already told me about here with the Wyvern is that this skill has been buffed a bit by granting 3 charges now on stunning unique enemies, which is good because I felt like it was difficult to actually use the power charge stuff in boss fights, but having 3 charges means you can get like 15 seconds plus of empowered attacks or something. You can like chain it through the rest of the boss fight. So I could see you kind of just getting 1 stun and then that carrying you through the rest of the boss fight as you expend all of your charges. So that does sound like a nice improvement. So the Rend basic attacks can spend a power charge if you aren't currently buffed to give you a buff with empowered lightning attacks. It gives that skill a much bigger AoE and adds lightning damage. It does a few other things with a few other skills too. It actually turns it from like a very basic little melee attack into like a pretty hefty, big cleaving skill that does quite a lot of damage. Empowered Rend, it is slow, but it is big and chunky and really satisfying, and I'm really hoping that there's some potential for like melee Rend builds that maintain empowerment with that, because it felt really good when I was cleaving my way through packs with it. Wyvern's early game was definitely the hardest to get the hang of all of the kind of types here, at least when you try to stay purely in Wyvern form, because again, just like you can just use something like Wing Blast alone for a melee escapes skill and then like play your bear build, right? There's no reason you have to kind of like force yourself to stay in any one form if like overall it doesn't feel like it's paying off for you. Still kind of wrapping my head around that. I did also kind of take Wyvern through one of the most difficult areas in the early game here, but once I got through there, the first Spirit Gem gave me options of Savage Fury, which is basically a druid-like berserk buff that drains your health for a short boost to speed and damage. It looks very strong for bossing, and it's probably not too hard to manage that life loss as long as you got like a flask charge or something. Probably well worth it, and I expect we'll see some use. Anything that boosts your damage and speed for a duration is usually a popular choice. I didn't get to chest it in this run though, as Spirit Gems are pretty hard to get hold of in the campaign, and I instead went for Briar Patch. So this buff stores some melee physical damage that you deal to enemies to automatically place a Thorny Ground when you next cast a spell. So if you put a volcano down, it'll be surrounded by Thorny Ground, or if you cast like a Lightning Strike or something, it'll be Thorny Ground as well. It's got a built-in delay, but it's super easy to charge up with just like a single pounce on enemies, for example. It's pretty low impact overall, though I was thinking that there's probably some good utility supports that can go on there later, especially for plant druid styles. Between Thorny Ground, Volcano, Entangle, and Totem at this point, we have a lot of persistent effects we can dump out before engaging in melee, And they all scale fine together at this point in the game, right? Like, so there's no real reason to just not go ham and use everything. It's just like throw everything in the kitchen sink at the boss and then go in and bear slam them. You know, you got time often while most bosses are doing some sort of monologue to like pre-place like 4 entangles, 2 volcanoes, a totem, and automatically place down the other thorny ground. So you're absolutely going to go that route. The other notable spirit gem choice that I passed up earlier was Herald of Ice, and I wasn't able to get my hands on one for the rest of the 3-act session, which is something I wanted to note because it's a bit of a shame because I played it and loved a lot of the wolf form, but I never really felt like I got the full picture of what it plays like to clear as an ice wolf. Because it feels pretty good, but it was missing a bit of AoE clear. That's the thing it probably struggled with the most. And not having Herald of Ice was like obviously the missing piece of that puzzle. So just keep that in mind as you watch that wolf gameplay in the future. And just mentally add some of your own ice explosions to that gameplay, just to kind of imagine how your werewolf leveling might go. It's already really satisfying, like doing the icicle explosions and freezing things and watching them shatter. I can only imagine with Herald of Ice how satisfying that's going to be. If I go wolf, I'll definitely grab Herald of Ice. For bear, I'd probably grab that Savage Fury. And Briar Patch if I level like a nature style druid maybe, I don't know. Activating it with Pounce maybe, I think that's more of a specific build thing. It's nice, but definitely not as impactful as other spirit gem choices. Late Act 1, you start to get your first weapon set passives, and unlike leveling other characters, I think you really want to start taking advantage of these right away if you're going spells and shapeshift combo. Which I absolutely think you should, it's super fun. So it's pretty simple initially to start doing this. If you've never messed with the weapon set trees, it only really gets confusing when you try to do respecking typically. That's when you kind of got to wrap your head around just how it works. But initially you can basically just kind of like throw any duration or clearly spell-oriented clusters on the staff weapon set, and any shapeshift or survivability nodes or melee damage stuff on the talisman set. I spent and tinkered with these a lot as I went, and it felt like a pretty nice payoff for it. There's like quite a lot of it going on that you can cherry pick between in the druid area of the tree. It makes sense. I think passive tree support is like super important for this sort of like hybrid playstyle. And it's good that that kicks into gear pretty early on if you want it. For Executioner, I decided to revisit the Bear Slams since they performed pretty well early on. I was keen to see how they were holding up at this point. I had the Totem now to add in, and that triggers the Jagged Ground from the Empowered Slams to create another explosion for some more bonus combo damage.
You have much to answer for. The hand that held the rope lies still.
And yeah, their form is pretty amazing on bosses, and overall pretty well rounded. Felt like the most well rounded of them, like powerful single target, decent AoE clear, maybe a little bit slower, offset by just switching into wolf form, and nice defenses too. Bear's pretty nice. And you know, you can just use that pounce to form shift into wolf and start sprinting when you move between packs. There's no reason why bear has to feel slow when you can instantly shapeshift into a wolf whenever you want. I was really vibing the hybrid wolf bear and human spells. It feels like you get to cherry pick the best parts of every part of these kind of 3 forms and just add them together to create a super build. Feels like cheating a little bit. Adding rage and rapid attacks to maul makes it really quick to generate rage for slams as well, with 3 mauls giving you enough for like 2 slams back to back. And when you start double and triple volcano slamming bosses, oh yeah, so good. Poor Candlemass and indeed poor Geonor. Guy really got outclassed on this whole shapeshifting trope even after selling his soul for it, right? So anyway, I don't know if you can hear in the background, but I have a newborn baby and our family is all sick right now. So I'll end part 1 of this preview here and optimistically hope to be able to get part 2 out before launch if I can. I'll try. Forgive me in advance if it's a bit later or if I can't make it. At times like this, I think it's best to just celebrate the small wins. Like, you know, making a part 1 preview and getting it published. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that it helps a few of you see a bit more of the Druids potentially, you know, the fun that it has to offer you if you're a bit unsure based on that initial reveal. I feel like Druid's getting a little bit of a raw deal in the reactions, so maybe do my part just to give you a little bit more of a realistic impression as to what it looks like. Anyway folks, that's it for now. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.